Welcome back. Get comfortable. Let the blanket settle. Let your breathing slow. Let the room go soft around you. Tonight, we are going underwater. Not dramatically underwater, not with the cameras and the swelling music and the predator chasing something through open water. We are going to the other parts of the ocean, the parts where things are happening slowly, in the dark, at considerable depth, without any awareness that anyone is paying attention. We are interested tonight in echolocation mechanics, bioluminescence, pigment chemistry, the exact mechanism by which a starfish eats, the administrative details of how a whale maintains its body temperature in cold water, and the particular way a sea cucumber has organized its digestive system relative to its respiratory system, which are, in the sea cucumber's case, the same system. Nothing here has any urgency. Nothing here requires your attention. Let it wash over you like cold water over a reef. We begin. The ocean covers approximately 71% of the Earth's surface and contains roughly 97% of the planet's water, and yet the large majority of it, in terms of both depth and volume, remains less explored than the surface of the moon. A comparison that oceanographers and marine scientists use frequently because it is genuinely accurate and genuinely remarkable. The average depth of the ocean is approximately 12,000 feet, or about 2 1/3 miles, and the deepest point, Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench in the western Pacific, reaches approximately 36,000 feet, or nearly 7 miles below the surface, a depth at which the water pressure is approximately 1,099 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level, a physical condition under which a styrofoam cup lowered to the bottom returns, squeezed to roughly the size of a thimble. The air pockets within the foam compressed by the surrounding water pressure until almost nothing remains, a demonstration of deep sea pressure that oceanographers have used as an educational tool for decades, and that still manages to be surprising when you first encounter it. Sunlight penetrates the ocean to a maximum depth of approximately 660 feet in the clearest open ocean water, a zone called the euphotic zone, where photosynthesis can occur and where most of the ocean's plant life and many of its animals live. Below this, from 660 feet to 3,300 feet, is the mesopelagic zone, also called the twilight zone, where faint light still reaches but is insufficient for photosynthesis, and where many animals migrate vertically each day, rising toward the surface to feed at night and descending back into the dimness during daylight hours to avoid predators, a daily vertical migration that, across the world ocean, represents one of the largest coordinated movements of animal biomass on the planet. Billions of small fish, crustaceans, and other creatures ascending and descending each 24 hours with a regularity that oceanographers track using sonar, which detects the dense layer of migrating animals as what is called the deep scattering layer, a sonar return so consistent and widespread that early naval sonar operators initially mistook it for the seafloor. The great white shark, probably the most recognizable shark species and certainly the one with the most extensive film career, is a cartilaginous fish, meaning its skeleton is made not of bone but of cartilage, a material lighter and more flexible than bone and which dissolves after death rather than fossilizing in the conventional sense, which is why the fossil record of sharks consists primarily of teeth rather than complete skeletons. A great white shark can have several rows of teeth, with new teeth continuously developing behind the current front row and moving forward as older teeth are lost. A conveyor belt tooth replacement system that means a shark may produce tens of thousands of teeth over its lifetime. The discarded teeth sinking to the seafloor in whatever waters the shark has frequented and eventually being covered by sediment and becoming the fossils that are subsequently recovered. Great white sharks can live for at least 70 years based on growth ring analysis of vertebral cartilage, making them considerably longer lived than previously understood. And females do not reach sexual maturity until approximately 33 years of age, a delayed reproductive timeline that makes their populations particularly vulnerable to fishing pressure, since removing mature individuals removes animals that took 3 decades to become capable of reproduction. The whale shark is the largest fish on Earth, reaching lengths of up to 40 feet or more and weighing potentially as much as 47,000 pounds, despite subsisting almost entirely on some of the smallest organisms in the ocean. Whale sharks are filter feeders, swimming slowly with their enormous mouths open and filtering zooplankton, fish eggs, krill, and small fish from the water through gill rakers as it passes across the gills, a feeding strategy shared with 2 other large shark species, the basking shark and the megamouth shark, and with the largest animals on Earth more generally, including baleen whales. The ocean apparently having found filter feeding on small, abundant prey to be a viable strategy for achieving very large body size. The whale shark has a mouth approximately 5 feet wide, containing hundreds of tiny teeth that appear to serve no feeding function, likely being vestigial remnants of the ancestral toothed shark body plan that evolution has not yet eliminated, and the whale shark's skin contains photoreceptors, meaning it may be able to perceive light through its skin in addition to through its eyes, a sensory arrangement whose purpose or function is not fully understood. The basking shark, the second largest fish in the ocean after the whale shark, is also a filter feeder, though its filtering mechanism differs from the whale shark's in that the basking shark swims passively with its mouth open, filtering through gill rakers as water passes across them rather than actively pumping water, and the basking shark's gill slits are so large that they nearly encircle the entire head, giving the animal, particularly when viewed head-on with its mouth open, an appearance quite unlike any other shark. The basking shark was historically the subject of intensive fisheries across the North Atlantic and Pacific, harvested primarily for its liver oil, which was used in lamps and later in various industrial applications, a harvesting pressure that substantially reduced populations in several regions, and the species' slow reproduction and late maturity, like many large sharks, makes recovery from population declines a slow process, measured in decades rather than years. Basking sharks have been observed leaping fully clear of the water in breaching behavior, an activity whose purpose in an animal that feeds by passive filtration and does not pursue active prey is not entirely clear, though social communication and parasite removal have been proposed as possible explanations for a behavior that seems, on the surface, like considerable effort for an animal whose general lifestyle philosophy appears to be the opposite. The octopus has appeared in the previous Animal Facts volume, but the ocean deserves a more thorough accounting of cephalopod achievement. The chambered nautilus is the sole surviving representative of a lineage that was once enormously diverse and widespread in the ancient oceans, the ammonites, its ancient relatives, having been among the most abundant and varied marine invertebrates for hundreds of millions of years before the mass extinction at the end of the Cretaceous period eliminated them along with the dinosaurs. The living nautilus uses its chambered shell for buoyancy control, filling the chambers with gas or liquid to adjust its position in the water column, a mechanism conceptually similar to the ballast tanks of submarines. And the nautilus uses a jet propulsion system for movement, drawing water into a muscular siphon and expelling it to move in the opposite direction, a mode of locomotion shared with squid and octopuses. The nautilus has poor eyesight relative to other cephalopods, its eye being a pinhole camera type without a lens rather than the camera type eye that squid and octopuses have independently evolved, and it navigates largely through chemical sensing, detecting chemical gradients in the water to locate prey, which it captures with up to 90 tentacles, considerably more than the 8 of an octopus or the 10 of a squid. The blue-ringed octopus is a small cephalopod, rarely exceeding 5 to 8 inches in total length, found primarily in tidal pools and reef areas of the Pacific and Indian Oceans, and it carries enough venom in its salivary glands to kill 26 adult humans, a quantity of venom disproportionate to its modest physical size that makes it one of the most venomous marine animals in the world relative to its dimensions. The venom, tetrodotoxin, blocks sodium channels in nerve cells, preventing signal transmission and causing paralysis of voluntary and involuntary muscles, including respiratory muscles, meaning that a victim of a blue-ringed octopus bite who does not receive artificial respiration can die from asphyxiation within minutes. The blue rings that give the animal its name fluoresce brilliantly when the octopus is agitated or threatened, transitioning from cryptic background coloration that blends with the reef to vivid, pulsing, iridescent blue rings as a warning display. One of the more dramatic examples of aposematism, warning coloration in the marine environment, and a display that most experienced divers treat with considerable respect. The coelacanth is a fish that was known only from fossils and was believed to have been extinct for approximately 65 million years until a living specimen was discovered by a museum curator named Marjorie Courtney Latimer in a South African fish market in 1938, the fish having been caught by local fishermen who were entirely unaware that they were handling an animal thought to be extinct for tens of millions of years. The coelacanth belongs to a lineage called the lobe-finned fishes that were, in evolutionary terms, more closely related to the ancestors of terrestrial vertebrates, including humans, than to most modern fish, the thick, muscular lobed fins being structurally analogous to the limbs of early land vertebrates in a way that the thin, rayed fins of most modern fish are not. Living coelacanths were subsequently found off the Comoro Islands in the western Indian Ocean and later off Indonesia, the populations separated by the entire Indian Ocean. suggesting either a wider historical distribution than previously known or a long, independent, separate colonization of the Indonesian waters, and the fish is now known to inhabit deep, steep reef edges during the day, resting in caves and emerging at night to feed on fish, squid, and other prey using a hinged jaw that allows the front of the skull to swing upward as the lower jaw drops, doubling the effective gape. Dolphins sleep with one half of their brain at a time, a phenomenon called unihemispheric slow-wave sleep, which allows one cerebral hemisphere to rest while the other remains active enough to maintain conscious breathing. Since dolphins are voluntary breathers who must consciously decide to take each breath rather than breathing automatically as mammals on land do, and falling entirely unconscious would therefore risk drowning. During unihemispheric sleep, one eye remains open and the dolphin continues to swim slowly at the surface, the open eye connected to the active hemisphere, and the dolphin can reverse which side is sleeping by closing the previously open eye and opening the previously closed one. Dolphins also experience rapid eye movement sleep, the deep sleep stage associated with dreaming in humans, though whether dolphins dream and what they might dream about are questions that current neuroscience cannot answer with confidence, and the idea of a dolphin lying at the ocean surface in the middle of the night with half its brain asleep and one eye open, potentially dreaming with the half that is resting, is the kind of image that rewards sitting with for a moment. The sperm whale has the largest brain of any animal on Earth by mass, approximately 18 pounds, compared to the average human brain weight of 3 pounds, and produces the loudest sounds made by any animal. Clicks called codas that can reach approximately 230 decibels and that function in echolocation for hunting deep water prey. Sperm whales dive to depths exceeding 7,000 feet in search of giant squid and other deep water prey, dives that can last 90 minutes or more, the whale holding its breath for the entire dive and storing oxygen in myoglobin within its muscles rather than in its blood alone, the muscles darkening in proportion to their myoglobin content, which is why sperm whale muscle is very dark in color. The sperm whale's head contains a large organ filled with a waxy substance called spermaceti, from which the whale takes its common name. Early whalers having mistaken the spermaceti organ's contents for sperm. The actual function of the spermaceti organ is still a matter of some debate, with proposed roles including acoustic focusing for the whale's echolocation clicks, buoyancy regulation through temperature-controlled solidification and liquefaction of the waxy contents, and possibly a combination of both, the organ being so large and anatomically central to the whale's enormous head that its function is clearly significant without being, even after considerable study, fully established. The narwhal is an Arctic whale that carries a spiraled tusk projecting from the left side of its upper jaw, the tusk being an elongated tooth that in adult males can reach lengths of 8 to 10 feet, the longest tusk relative to body length of any animal. For centuries after narwhals were known to European traders through their tusks, the animal itself was essentially unknown to Europeans, the tusks being sold as unicorn horns at considerable prices and believed to have magical and medicinal properties, a misidentification that worked substantially in the narwhal's favor from a commercial standpoint, though not in any way the narwhal itself was aware of or intended. The function of the tusk in living narwhals has been the subject of long scientific debate, and current understanding suggests it serves multiple purposes, including sensing the environment through up to 10 million nerve endings that make it a sensory organ of remarkable sensitivity, jousting between males in competition for females, and possibly attracting mates through visual display of tusk length. Female narwhals rarely develop a tusk, and some males develop two, the second tooth on the right side also elongating in occasional individuals, giving double-tusked narwhals an appearance even more implausible than the standard configuration. The seahorse is the only animal species in which the male carries the young through pregnancy, the female depositing eggs into a specialized brood pouch on the male's abdomen where the eggs are fertilized and the embryos develop, the male providing oxygen and nutrients through the pouch wall during gestation, and eventually giving birth to fully formed miniature seahorses through muscular contractions that function similarly to labor in mammals. The male seahorse's physical experience of carrying and delivering offspring is sufficiently close to mammalian pregnancy that researchers studying seahorse reproduction have used it as a comparative model for studying the evolution of pregnancy-related physiology. Seahorses are also notable for their monogamy, mating pairs engaging in a greeting ritual each morning in which they link tails and perform a brief, synchronized swimming display before separating for the day's activities, a daily ritual that, across the typical lifespan of a seahorse pair, represents a sustained investment in the pair bond considerably more deliberate than most people would attribute to a small fish that moves by undulating a single small dorsal fin. The mantis shrimp appeared in the previous volume, but the ocean version of the same fact deserves its own telling in this context. What is worth adding is that mantis shrimp establish and defend burrows in the seafloor, and when intruders approach their burrow, resident mantis shrimp engage them in ritualized combat that involves a standardized series of threat displays and responses. The intruder and resident following a somewhat formalized sequence of behavioral exchanges before the outcome is determined, a degree of social and behavioral complexity not widely expected in a crustacean that researchers studying it have found genuinely remarkable. Mantis shrimp also have complex mating systems involving long-term pair bonds in some species, sharing a burrow for up to 20 years, the two animals inhabiting the same small tube in the seafloor for 2 decades, a domestic arrangement that, given the mantis shrimp's capacity for violence and the cramped quarters involved, functions considerably more peacefully than one might expect from an animal whose primary claim to scientific fame is being able to punch through aquarium glass. The sunfish, or mola mola, is the heaviest bony fish in the ocean, reaching weights of up to 5,000 pounds and lengths of up to 10 feet. With a body shape so compressed from front to back relative to its height that it looks, when viewed from the side, like the back half of a larger fish that has simply not arrived yet, its rear being a rounded, flexible pseudo-tail called a clavis rather than a conventional fishtail. The sunfish feeds primarily on jellyfish and other soft-bodied prey, and is an ambush predator in a very slow and patient sense. drifting into contact with prey rather than pursuing it. Sunfish spend substantial time basking on their sides at the ocean surface in behavior that is thought to serve as thermoregulation after dives into cold, deep water, the fish warming itself in the sunlight, though it also appears to attract seabirds that remove parasites from the sunfish's skin, making the basking behavior potentially multifunctional. Ocean sunfish are frequently encountered by divers and boaters who describe the experience of encountering a several-ton circular fish the size of a small car floating passively near the surface as one of the more surreal encounters available in the open ocean, and the fish appears, by most accounts, to be unimpressed by the encounter in return. The anglerfish of the deep ocean, most familiar from its iconic bioluminescent lure dangling above its enormous jaws, has one of the most extreme sexual dimorphism systems of any vertebrate animal, the males being dramatically smaller than the females, in some species reaching only a fraction of the female size, and upon encountering a female in the dark deep sea, the male bites into her body and begins a process of physical fusion in which the male's circulatory system merges with the female's, his internal organs, eyes, and most other structures gradually degenerating as he becomes metabolically dependent on the female until eventually little remains of the male except a pair of sperm-producing gonads attached to the female's body, the female potentially carrying multiple males fused to her body simultaneously, each providing sperm for fertilization when she spawns. This reproductive strategy is thought to be an adaptation to the extreme difficulty of finding a mate in the vast, dark, sparsely populated deep ocean, the male in effect transforming himself into a permanent reproductive organ rather than risk losing contact with the only female he may ever encounter. A solution to the mate-finding problem that is, by any measure, both remarkably committed and anatomically extreme. The ocean sunfish has a parasitic problem that is itself remarkable in scope, having been documented as host to over 40 species of parasites living in, on, and within its body simultaneously, a parasite diversity that makes the ocean sunfish one of the most heavily parasitized animals in the sea. The sheer number and variety of organisms exploiting a single sunfish representing a kind of ecological nested system in which the sunfish functions simultaneously as an individual animal and as an ecosystem for a surprising number of other species. Cleaner wrasses and other fish that remove parasites from larger animals are therefore attracted to sunfish in ways that make cleaning interactions around sunfish particularly active and extended compared to other species. And the sunfish has been described as functioning in some ecological discussions as a mobile reef of sorts, carrying its own community of associated organisms through the open ocean in a manner that reef-bound organisms do not need to. The hagfish is a primitive jawless fish that produces extraordinary quantities of slime when disturbed. The slime being a fibrous, gel-like substance that expands dramatically in seawater, a single hagfish capable of filling a bucket with slime from a relatively small initial secretion, the slime being produced from glands along the hagfish's body and consisting of a matrix of protein threads embedded in mucus that, when it contacts seawater, hydrates and swells into a volume many times larger than the original secretion. The slime's primary defensive function is to clog the gills of predatory fish that attempt to eat the hagfish, the predator rapidly spitting the hagfish out as the slime interferes with its ability to breathe, and the hagfish then removes the slime from its own body by tying itself into a knot and running the knot along its own body from front to back, squeezing the slime off in a behavior that is, functionally, a very strange and specific form of grooming. Hagfish feed primarily on carrion, boring into the bodies of dead fish and whales that sink to the seafloor, consuming the flesh from inside the carcass. And they absorb nutrients not only through their digestive tract, but directly through their skin. The hagfish being one of the very few vertebrate animals capable of transdermal nutrient absorption, a biological economy of digestion that is particularly efficient in the nutrient-rich interior of a decomposing whale carcass. The whale fall, the carcass of a dead whale that sinks to the seafloor, creates an entire successional ecological community that can persist for decades. The enormous body providing food and habitat for a sequence of distinct animal communities over its long decomposition, beginning with mobile scavengers including sharks, sleeper sharks, and hagfish that strip the soft tissue, followed by enrichment opportunists, including crustaceans and polychaete worms that colonize the remaining bones and organic-rich sediment, and eventually sulfophilic bacteria that consume the lipids within the whale's bones in a process that generates hydrogen sulfide, supporting chemosynthetic communities similar to those found at hydrothermal vents. Communities that can persist for years or decades as the bones are slowly consumed. The whale fall community includes several species found nowhere else, specialists adapted specifically to this ephemeral habitat of enormous energy-rich carcasses scattered across the deep sea floor, and the whale fall has been described by some ecologists as functioning as stepping stones in the deep ocean. The dispersal of these vent-like communities between successive whale falls, potentially explaining how chemosynthetic organisms have spread across the deep sea floor over geological time. A single large blue whale carcass can provide a community of deep-sea organisms with more organic material than would otherwise accumulate in the surrounding seafloor sediment over the course of 2,000 years of marine snow deposition. The sea star, commonly called the starfish despite not being a fish in any taxonomic sense, digests its prey externally, everting its stomach out through its mouth onto the prey item, secreting digestive enzymes and reabsorbing the resulting nutrient soup, a feeding method that allows the sea star to consume prey items, including mussels, clams, and oysters, whose shells it could not otherwise open wide enough to consume, by inserting its everted stomach through even a very slight gap between the shell halves and digesting the contents in place. Sea stars have no brain and no blood, their hydraulic water vascular system pumping water through internal channels to operate their tube feet. The small suction cup appendages on the underside of each arm that allow the sea star to grip surfaces, move slowly across the seafloor, and apply sustained force to open bivalve shells. Sea stars can regenerate lost arms, and some species can regenerate an entire body from a single arm, a regenerative capacity that commercial oyster fishermen in the early 20th century discovered to their cost when they attempted to control sea star populations by cutting them in half and throwing them back into the water, inadvertently doubling the population rather than reducing it. The flying fish can generate sufficient thrust through its powerful tail to launch itself from the water at speeds of up to 35 miles per hour, spreading its enlarged pectoral fins to glide through the air for distances of up to 1,200 feet, the longest glides involving multiple contacts with wave crests during which the tail quickly beats the water surface to extend the flight, a behavior called taxiing that allows the fish to sustain its airborne trajectory across distances that would otherwise be impossible for a single jump. The flying fish glides to escape predators in the water below, and the behavior is effective against those predators, but exposes the fish to aerial predators, including birds. The fish's transition between environments in its escape attempt, involving a shift from one set of threats to another rather than an escape from threat entirely, a predicament that seems to have been resolved in evolutionary terms by the flying fish becoming extremely good at gliding rather than by any more elegant solution. The electric eel, despite its name, is not a true eel, but a knife fish, more closely related to catfish than to true eels, and it generates electric fields through specialized cells called electrocytes that are derived evolutionarily from muscle cells but have lost the ability to contract, functioning instead as biological batteries that can produce discharges of up to 800 volts and 1 ampere of current, used both for hunting prey, which the electric current stuns or kills, and for navigation through the murky freshwater rivers of South America, where the electric eel lives. The lower voltage pulses produced continuously, allowing the fish to sense objects in its environment through the distortions they cause in the electric field. The electric eel breathes air, surfacing every 10 minutes or so to gulp oxygen from above the water surface, because the hypoxic, oxygen-poor conditions of its preferred slow-moving South American river habitat make gill breathing insufficient to meet its oxygen needs. Recent research has documented electric eels leaping partially out of the water onto the wet flanks of larger animals, pressing their chins against the animal's body to deliver electric shocks directly rather than through the water, a hunting strategy for terrestrial prey at the water's edge that was only documented and verified in the 21st century, despite the electric eel having been known to science since the 18th. The moon jellyfish, one of the most commonly encountered jellyfish in temperate coastal waters worldwide, is approximately 96% water, has no brain, no heart, no blood, no gills, and no bones, and yet manages to coordinate the rhythmic pulsing of its bell, capture and digest prey, reproduce, and navigate sufficiently to maintain a position in the water column, all without any of the organ systems that most people would consider minimum requirements for sustained biological operation. Jellyfish have existed in essentially their current form for approximately 500 million years, predating the dinosaurs by an enormous margin, and their basic body plan has proven sufficiently functional that evolution has not found any compelling reason to substantially modify it across that extraordinary span of time. Jellyfish blooms, aggregations sometimes numbering in the billions, can cover areas of ocean stretching for miles and can severely impact fisheries by clogging nets and competing with fish for zooplankton prey. And the apparent increase in jellyfish bloom frequency in recent decades has been tentatively linked by some researchers to warming ocean temperatures and changes in zooplankton communities, though the documentation and attribution of jellyfish bloom trends remains complicated by historically limited monitoring of jellyfish populations relative to commercially important fish species. The bioluminescent properties of deep-sea organisms represent one of the ocean's most pervasive and most independently evolved biological features, with bioluminescence having evolved independently at least 40 to 50 separate times across different marine animal lineages, making it one of the most frequently convergently evolved biological capabilities in the animal kingdom. The chemistry and molecular mechanisms varying considerably between these independent evolutionary origins while producing a similar optical result, the production of visible light without heat through a chemical reaction involving a light-emitting molecule called a luciferin and an enzyme called a luciferase. The deep sea itself is estimated by some researchers to be populated primarily by bioluminescent organisms, the proportion of species capable of producing light increasing dramatically below the depth at which sunlight penetrates, and the purposes of bioluminescence are correspondingly diverse, including attracting prey, as in the anglerfish's lure, communicating with potential mates, counter-illumination camouflage, in which animals produce light from their undersides to match the faint, downwelling daylight and disappear against it when viewed from below, distraction of predators, and simple illumination of the environment for sensing. The ocean's biological light serving as many different functions as the ocean's electrical, chemical, and acoustic signals in the service of organisms living in a lightless environment who have found multiple independent ways to generate their own. The emperor penguin is not a sea creature in the conventional sense, but spends the large majority of its life at sea, coming to land only to breed, and it dives to depths of over 1,800 feet in pursuit of fish and squid, holding its breath for up to 22 minutes, its heart rate dropping to as few as 15 beats per minute during the deepest dives to conserve oxygen, and its blood having a higher hemoglobin concentration and its muscles a higher myoglobin content than most other diving birds, allowing oxygen storage sufficient for these extended dives. Emperor penguins breed during the Antarctic winter, the male incubating a single egg balanced on his feet under a brood pouch for approximately 65 days through temperatures as low as -40 degrees Celsius, and winds up to 80 miles per hour, eating nothing during this period and losing up to 45% of his body weight by the time the egg hatches. Survival through the Antarctic winter, depending on huddling behavior in which the penguins rotate continuously through a compact, warm-centered mass, every individual eventually cycling through the warm interior, a collective thermoregulation strategy that requires no coordination beyond each bird moving toward warmth, producing a slow, continuous rotation of the entire huddle across the ice without any individual directing it. The horseshoe crab is not a crab but an arthropod more closely related to spiders and scorpions, and it has been relatively unchanged in its basic body plan for approximately 450 million years, surviving mass extinctions, including the one that ended the dinosaurs, making it what biologists call a living fossil in the loose popular sense, though the term is somewhat misleading as the living horseshoe crab has certainly evolved over this time period in ways not apparent from its overall preserved body plan. The horseshoe crab's blood is blue owing to the copper-containing compound hemocyanin rather than the iron-containing hemoglobin that makes vertebrate blood red, and it contains an extremely sensitive clotting agent called limulus amebocyte lysata that detects and clumps around bacterial endotoxins with such specificity and speed that it became the standard test for bacterial contamination of injectable medical products. Every vaccine and injectable medication in the United States being tested using horseshoe crab blood-derived reagents, making the horseshoe crab an involuntary but significant contributor to modern pharmaceutical safety that is entirely unaware of this role. The horseshoe crab comes ashore to breed during full and new moon high tides in spring and early summer, the beaches of Delaware Bay being among the most significant breeding sites, and the timing and scale of this annual breeding migration is tracked annually by researchers and volunteers who count the crabs in what has become one of the longer-running systematic wildlife monitoring programs on the Atlantic coast. The ocean currents that circulate water around the globe, collectively called the thermohaline circulation or the global ocean conveyor belt, are driven by differences in the temperature and salinity of water in different parts of the ocean. Cold, salty, dense water sinking in the North Atlantic and flowing along the ocean floor toward the Southern Ocean and eventually into the Pacific and Indian Oceans, while warmer surface water flows northward to replace it. A circulation pattern that distributes heat, nutrients, and dissolved gases around the planet, and that plays a significant role in regulating climate in ways that make the proper functioning of ocean circulation relevant, not just to marine biology, but to the entire planetary system that determines how warm various regions are and whether they receive adequate rainfall. The circulation is powered by no pump other than the density differences created by temperature and salinity, a passive, self-sustaining system that has operated for millions of years through the simple physics of cold, salty water being denser and sinking, and warm, fresh water being less dense and floating. A system so large and slow that a single parcel of water making the complete circuit around the global ocean conveyor belt takes approximately 1,000 years. The coconut crab, the largest land-living arthropod in the world, begins its life as a marine larva in the open ocean before transitioning to a terrestrial lifestyle, growing so large over its decades-long lifespan that its body can no longer extract sufficient oxygen from water through gills, and it would drown if submerged for extended periods, a complete reversal from its juvenile marine existence. Coconut crabs can weigh up to 9 pounds and have a leg span of up to 3 feet, and they can climb trees, including coconut palms, and have been observed opening coconuts with their powerful claws, a feat that requires substantial mechanical force and that the crabs accomplish by striking the coconut in specific weak points with repeated directed blows, demonstrating a degree of goal-directed mechanical problem solving not widely expected in a crab. The coconut crab is also strongly attracted to novel and shiny objects, and several accounts exist of coconut crabs on remote islands stealing and hoarding human possessions, including silverware, glasses, and small tools from campsites, carrying them back to their burrows in behavior whose purpose is not clearly established, but whose practical consequences for unattended campsite equipment are well documented. The Portuguese man-of-war is frequently described as a jellyfish, but is not a jellyfish or even a single organism, being instead a colonial organism called a siphonophore, composed of individual animals called zooids that are so highly specialized and interdependent that none can survive independently, the whole colony functioning as a single integrated unit while consisting of genetically identical individuals performing different roles, some zooids forming the gas-filled float, others the stinging tentacles that can extend up to 160 feet below the surface, others responsible for digestion, others for reproduction. The man-of-war cannot actively move through the water but travels wherever wind and current take it. The float positioned above the surface and acting as a sail, and on certain conditions of wind and current, enormous numbers of Portuguese men-of-war can aggregate and be driven onto beaches simultaneously, the stinging tentacles remaining dangerous for some time even after the organism is dead and stranded, the nematocysts, the stinging cells, remaining capable of firing in response to contact well after the colony itself has perished. The mako shark is the fastest shark in the ocean, capable of sustained speeds of approximately 35 miles per hour and short bursts estimated at up to 45 miles per hour. The speed enabled by a body plan specifically adapted for efficient hydrodynamic movement through water, including tiny scales called dermal denticles that reduce drag by channeling water flow over the body surface in a manner that has been studied by engineers interested in replicating the efficiency in human-designed surfaces, including swimsuit fabrics and ship hulls. Mako sharks are also capable of jumping out of the water to heights of 20 feet or more, a behavior observed both when pursuing prey and when they themselves are being pursued, which creates the somewhat startling situation for sport fishermen of a very fast airborne shark. Mako sharks maintain their body temperature above the surrounding water temperature through a countercurrent heat exchange system in which warm blood flowing from the muscles passes close to cold blood flowing from the gills, transferring heat and keeping the muscles warmer than the surrounding ocean. A physiological adaptation shared with other fast, active sharks, including the great white, allowing more powerful muscle performance in cold water than a fully ectothermic shark of the same size could achieve. The coral reef, home to approximately 25% of all marine species, despite occupying less than 1% of the ocean floor, is built by the accumulated calcium carbonate skeletons of tiny coral polyps, each individual polyp being a small, soft-bodied animal related to sea anemones that secretes a hard cup of calcium carbonate as its external skeleton. the colony of thousands or millions of polyps growing incrementally and building a reef structure that may take thousands of years to develop to its present size. Individual coral polyps contain within their tissues photosynthetic algae called zooxanthellae, which provide the coral with the majority of its nutrition through photosynthesis in exchange for shelter and the compounds the polyp produces as metabolic byproducts. A mutualistic relationship so fundamental to coral survival that when ocean temperatures rise sufficiently to stress the coral, the polyp expels its zooxanthellae in a process called coral bleaching, the coral turning white as it loses the algae, and if the temperature stress persists, the coral starves and dies. The Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia, the largest coral reef system in the world, is visible from space and stretches over 1,400 miles, containing more biodiversity than most terrestrial ecosystems of comparable size, and it has experienced multiple significant bleaching events in recent decades during periods of elevated ocean temperature. Events that have caused substantial mortality across portions of the reef and that represent one of the most closely monitored, ongoing large-scale ecological changes in the world ocean. And so we drift now slowly upward through the water column, through the dark mesopelagic zone where the bioluminescent flashes come and go without anyone above watching, through the euphotic zone where the light from the surface has been filtering down all day, and finally to the surface itself, where the water meets the air and the wind moves things around without any particular interest in the ocean below. The whale is still down there somewhere, ticking at 15 heartbeats per minute in the deep dark, following whatever it follows at that depth. The Nautilus is drifting on its own slow current, adjusting the gas in its chambers by a fraction, finding the right depth. The hagfish is inside something in the sediment, absorbing nutrients through its skin, completely content. The sea star is very slowly pulling open a muscle, extruding its stomach through a gap measured in millimeters, waiting with the patience of something that has no concept of waiting. There is nothing more you need to carry from tonight. The ocean is still doing what it does, which is most of the things that keep the planet working, quietly and without requiring any acknowledgement. The current is still moving somewhere beneath you, cold water sinking and warm water rising, the whole circulation taking 1,000 years to complete one circuit, which means the water that started moving when Genghis Khan was alive is still on its way around. Let that be someone else's concern for now. Let the reef accumulate its calcium carbonate in the dark. Let the whale fall sink slowly through the water column toward its decades of community. Let the seahorse couple do their morning greeting ritual in whatever warm, shallow water they have found. You have nothing to do about any of this tonight, and it will all still be there tomorrow, proceeding on its own terms at the pace of an ocean. Good night. The leafy sea dragon is a marine fish related to seahorses, found only in the coastal waters of southern Australia, and it is covered in elaborate leaf-like appendages that provide exceptional camouflage among the kelp and seagrass beds where it lives. The appendages having no locomotor function and being purely decorative in the camouflage sense, the fish moving by undulating two nearly transparent fins that are almost invisible in motion, giving the animal, when it moves, the appearance of a piece of seaweed drifting in a current rather than a fish choosing a direction. Like the seahorse, the male leafy sea dragon carries the eggs, though in this species there is no pouch. The eggs instead being carried on a spongy brood patch on the underside of the male's tail, where they are fertilized and incubated until hatching. The leafy sea dragon feeds exclusively on mysid shrimp and other very small crustaceans, sucking them in through its tubular snout with a rapid expansion of the jaw cavity that creates a suction strong enough to draw in prey from some small distance, a feeding mechanism shared with the seahorse and the pipefish and several other members of the same family that all have this distinctive tubular, toothless snout. The pufferfish, when threatened, rapidly inflates its body by swallowing water or occasionally air if removed from the water, expanding to several times its normal size and transforming from a relatively slender fish into a nearly spherical one covered in spines. A defensive display that makes the pufferfish extremely difficult for most predators to swallow, and most predators apparently learn quickly that a pufferfish is not worth the attempt. The pufferfish also contains tetrodotoxin, the same compound found in the blue-ringed octopus, concentrated particularly in the liver, ovaries, skin, and intestines, making most species of pufferfish highly toxic to eat without specific preparation. In Japan, pufferfish, called fugu, is considered a delicacy and is prepared by specially trained and licensed chefs who know precisely which parts of the fish contain the toxin and can prepare the remainder safely, a culinary tradition involving food that can kill you if the chef makes a mistake that most food safety frameworks would find difficult to license, but that Japan has maintained as a regulated, licensed culinary practice for centuries. The pufferfish also draws elaborate geometric patterns in the seafloor sand during courtship, the male pufferfish spending days or weeks creating a circular pattern of ridges and valleys up to 6 feet in diameter, a construction project whose purpose is to attract females who inspect and judge the patterns and mate with males whose patterns are most elaborate and precise, making the pufferfish one of the few fish known to produce deliberate geometric art as a reproductive strategy. The clownfish, made broadly famous by a popular animated film, lives in a mutualistic relationship with sea anemones. The clownfish immune to the anemone's stinging cells through a coating of mucus that prevents the nematocysts from firing, and the fish living among the anemone's tentacles where it is protected from its own predators, cleaning the anemone, providing it with nutrients through its waste, and deterring anemone-eating fish. Clownfish are sequential hermaphrodites, all individuals being born male, with a group of clownfish typically containing one dominant female, one reproductive male, and several smaller non-reproductive males. And if the female dies, the reproductive male changes sex and becomes the new female, and the largest non-reproductive male becomes the new reproductive male, the whole social hierarchy shifting in response to the death of the female. This means that in the story of a clownfish searching for his son, the more biologically accurate sequel, once the mother was eaten, would have involved the father changing sex and becoming the mother, a plot detail the animated film did not pursue. The barrel-eye fish, or Macropinna microstoma, is a small deep-sea fish with a transparent, fluid-filled dome on top of its head, visible from outside the fish, beneath which are its eyes, which are tubular and point upward in their default position, able to rotate within the transparent dome to look forward as well. For many years, the barrel-eyes eyes were described from preserved specimens as fixed and forward-pointing, but in situ observation by remotely operated vehicles in their natural habitat revealed that the dome that was destroyed by pressure during specimen collection was in fact present in living fish, and that the eyes within it rotated, a discovery that significantly changed the understanding of how the fish uses its vision in the deep sea, where it appears to look upward for the silhouettes of prey against the faint downwelling light and then rotate its eyes forward when approaching a prey item. The barrel-eyes transparent head is filled with fluid and is a functioning optical system in its own right, the fluid having a specific refractive index that works with the tubular eyes to provide clear vision in multiple directions, a visual arrangement that has no close analog in any other known vertebrate. The migratory routes of sea turtles, which navigate across entire ocean basins to return to the beaches where they were born to lay their own eggs, have been tracked with increasing sophistication using satellite tags, revealing that turtles displaced experimentally from their routes can reorient and resume the correct direction, that they use both the Earth's magnetic field and chemical cues in the water to navigate, and that individual turtles show highly consistent routes across multiple migrations spanning decades. The same turtle returning year after year to the same nesting beach, sometimes to within a few hundred meters of the location where it hatched years or decades earlier. A navigational feat accomplished without any external reference points in the open ocean and across distances of hundreds or thousands of miles. Sea turtles must return to the surface to breathe, doing so every few minutes while active and every few hours while resting and sleeping. Sea turtles have been documented wedging themselves under rocks or coral ledges to remain stationary on the seafloor while resting, their heart rate slowing dramatically to conserve oxygen during the resting period, in a physiological response that extends their ability to remain submerged beyond what their metabolic rate during active swimming would allow. The sailfish is generally considered the fastest fish in the ocean, with reliable speed estimates in the range of 68 miles per hour during pursuit of prey, achieved through a combination of a streamlined body, a powerful crescent-shaped tail, and the ability to fold its large dorsal sail fin flat against the body during high-speed pursuits, reducing drag and raising it when herding prey into tight balls where individual fish are more easily caught. Sailfish hunt cooperatively in small groups, using their bills and sail fins to corral prey fish and taking turns striking at the compressed prey ball, a coordinated hunting behavior that allows each fish more efficient access to prey than individual hunting would provide. And the coordination of these hunts, which requires each fish to adjust its behavior based on the positions and movements of the others, implies a level of social coordination not widely expected in fish. The sailfish's bill is used to slash through prey fish rather than to spear them, the lateral movements of the bill stunning or injuring multiple prey fish in a single sweep, a hunting strategy that at 68 miles per hour generates forces sufficient to stun multiple fish simultaneously without requiring precise aim at any single individual. The vampire squid, despite its dramatic name and dark coloration, does not actually hunt prey in the manner of other squid, having evolved in the oxygen minimum zone of the deep ocean, where maintaining a high-energy predatory lifestyle is metabolically impractical. Instead, it feeds on marine snow and particulate organic matter that drifts down from the surface, using two long retractile filaments to gather particles and two webs of mucus-coated skin to collect and concentrate the gathered material before consuming it. A passive, low-energy feeding strategy that suits the low-oxygen environment it inhabits. When threatened, the vampire squid inverts its webbed arms over its body, exposing numerous small, soft projections called cirri that create a defensive display, making the animal appear larger and less edible. And it can also produce bioluminescent flashes from photophores on its body, creating light displays that may distract or confuse predators in the otherwise completely dark environment. The vampire squid's oxygen extraction from the water around it is extremely efficient compared to other cephalopods, allowing it to survive in water with as little as 3% oxygen saturation, a tolerance for hypoxic conditions that effectively grants it exclusive access to a zone of the deep ocean that most other active predators cannot inhabit. The jawless lamprey, an eel-like vertebrate more closely related to hagfish than to true eels, attaches to host fish using a circular, tooth-covered sucker mouth and rasps through the host's scales and skin to feed on blood and body fluids, a parasitic feeding strategy that can weaken or eventually kill the host fish. And the sea lamprey's invasion of the North American Great Lakes following the construction of canals that allowed it to bypass Niagara Falls caused severe damage to native lake trout populations in the mid-20th century. One of the more well-documented examples of invasive species impact on a large freshwater ecosystem. Lampreys have a jawless mouth as adults, but have complex larval forms called amocoetes that live buried in stream sediment for several years, filter feeding on organic matter before metamorphosing into the parasitic adult form. And the lamprey's genome has been studied extensively because its jawless lineage diverged from the jawed vertebrate lineage, which includes all fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals approximately 500 million years ago, making it one of the most distantly related vertebrate lineages to our own, and therefore a useful reference point for understanding the evolutionary origins of vertebrate biology. Sharks have been on Earth for approximately 450 million years, predating the dinosaurs by 200 million years, predating the existence of trees, and surviving all 5 of the major mass extinction events in Earth's history, a persistence that places the shark lineage in a select group of biological designs that evolution has found persistently functional across enormous spans of geological time and across the dramatic environmental changes that have repeatedly reshaped life on Earth. The shark's sensory arsenal includes not just the electroreception through ampullae of Lorenzini that allows it to detect the electrical fields of prey buried in sand or swimming in murky water, but also a lateral line system that detects pressure waves and water movement, an acute sense of smell capable of detecting blood at concentrations as low as 1 part per million, and excellent low-light vision through a reflective layer behind the retina called the tapetum lucidum that doubles the light available to the photoreceptors, a sensory combination that makes the shark one of the most comprehensively sensory-equipped predators in the ocean across multiple independent sensory modalities, none of which are dramatic in their individual description but collectively make the shark's awareness of its environment substantially more complete than most other marine predators operating in the same waters. The humpback whale's songs, which can last for hours and are sung only by males, change gradually over the course of each breeding season in a culturally transmitted pattern, individual males in a population incorporating new phrases and patterns that spread through the population from individual to individual in a process of vocal learning analogous in several respects to the cultural transmission of music within human populations, though the mechanism appears to be simple copying rather than any form of deliberate teaching. Humpback whales also engage in cooperative bubble net feeding, in which groups of whales dive below a school of fish and blow bubbles in a circular pattern while ascending, creating a cylinder of bubbles that corrals the fish into a compact ball at the surface, then lunge through the ball with mouths open to engulf large quantities of fish. A coordinated hunting behavior that requires each whale to play a specific role, some blowing bubbles, others herding, others leading the lunge, and that produces dramatically more efficient feeding than the same whales could achieve independently. The coordination implying a degree of social communication and role assignment during the hunt. The cleaner rasa is a small tropical reef fish that establishes cleaning stations at specific locations on the reef where larger fish, called clients, come to have parasites, dead tissue, and debris removed from their bodies and gills. The cleaner wrasse entering the mouths and gill chambers of fish that could easily swallow it, and the clients remaining still and often adopting specific postures that signal their intention to be cleaned rather than to eat the cleaner rasa. The relationship between cleaner rasa and clients has been extensively studied as an example of mutualism and also as a context in which to investigate fish cognition, cleaner wrasse having been shown to pass versions of the mirror self-recognition test to behave more honestly toward clients when other potential client fish are watching, adjusting their tendency to cheat by nibbling preferred mucus from clients rather than removing parasites based on whether they are being observed, and to remember and treat individual clients differently based on past interactions, behavioral sophistication in a fish that has substantially changed assumptions about the cognitive capacities available to small reef fish. The torpedo ray or electric ray is a flat-bodied elasmobranch related to sharks and skates that generates electric discharges through specialized organs derived from modified gill muscles, producing bursts of electricity used to stun prey and deter predators, the voltage varying considerably by species, but reaching up to 220 volts in the larger species. Sufficient to knock a person off their feet in shallow water, a property known to ancient Greek and Roman physicians who used electric rays therapeutically. placing the fish on the bodies of patients with gout and headaches in one of the earliest documented uses of electrical stimulation in medicine, the analgesic effect of the mild shock apparently providing temporary relief that, while not curative, was sufficient to recommend the practice across several centuries of classical medical literature. The torpedo ray hunts by dropping down onto prey fish from above and wrapping its pectoral fins around the fish before delivering a stunning electric discharge, a hunting technique that requires the ray to position itself correctly before discharging, and the speed of the electrical discharge combined with the engulfing fin movement happens rapidly enough that the prey has little opportunity to escape once the ray has committed to the attack. The decorator crab adorns its own shell with living sponges, sea anemones, algae, and other sessile organisms, attaching them to specialized hooked hairs on its carapace and legs, the attached organisms providing camouflage that makes the crab difficult to distinguish from the surrounding reef or seafloor environment, while also providing chemical deterrence if the attached organisms are toxic or unpalatable to predators, making the decorator crab's decorating behavior simultaneously a camouflage strategy and a chemical defense strategy, with the specific selection of decorating materials varying between individual crabs and appearing to reflect some degree of active choice rather than purely random attachment of whatever is available in the immediate environment. When a decorator crab molts and grows a new, larger shell, it often transfers some of its living decorations from the old shell to the new one. The continued investment in specific organisms that may have been attached for some time, representing a behavioral flexibility not widely anticipated in a crab and suggesting that the decorator crab has some representation of its decorative material as a resource worth managing across molts rather than simply as an incidental accumulation. The gray whale undertakes one of the longest migrations of any mammal, traveling up to 12,000 miles round trip between summer feeding grounds in the Arctic and winter breeding grounds in the warm lagoons of Baja California, a migration that takes approximately 2 to 3 months in each direction and follows the North American Pacific coast closely enough that the whales are regularly observable from shore during their passage, making them one of the more accessible large whale species for casual observation and creating a significant whale watching industry along the California coast based almost entirely on the reliable seasonal timing of this migration. Gray whales are bottom feeders, rolling onto their sides to suction amphipod crustaceans and other benthic organisms from the seafloor, a feeding strategy that stirs up significant plumes of sediment visible from above the surface. And individual gray whales often show a preference for feeding on a particular side, being left-sided or right-sided bottom feeders in a manner analogous to human-handedness, the preferred feeding side showing more wear on the baleen plates used to filter sediment during feeding. The blobfish achieved considerable internet fame following the 2013 vote in which it was named the ugliest animal in the world by the Ugly Animal Preservation Society, a title awarded based on photographs of a specimen collected from a depth of approximately 3,000 feet that had been badly deformed by the decompression it underwent upon being brought to the surface. the pressure change causing the gelatinous, low-density body of the fish to expand and collapse in ways that produce the distinctive, melancholy-looking blobby appearance that made it famous. In its natural habitat at pressures 800 times greater than at the surface. The blobfish is a fairly unremarkable-looking fish, the gelatinous body being a buoyancy adaptation to life at a depth where the fish's body needs to be less dense than the surrounding water without expending energy to maintain position, since a conventional gas swim bladder would collapse under the pressure at those depths. The blobfish is therefore, in a meaningful sense, a normal-looking fish that became famous for looking abnormal, specifically because of the physical conditions imposed on it during its removal from its natural environment, a fame built substantially on misrepresentation of its natural appearance, which it continues to bear with the equanimity available to an animal that is not aware of being famous. The sea slug, a general term covering numerous species of nudibranchs and other shell-less marine gastropods, has evolved an extraordinary diversity of forms, colors, and chemical defenses. Many species being brilliantly colored in ways that advertise their toxicity to predators. The colors representing some of the most vivid and varied pigmentation found anywhere in the animal kingdom, entirely underwater and for many years essentially unobserved by most humans before underwater photography made them accessible to wider appreciation. Some nudibranch species sequester the stinging cells of the sea anemones and hydroids they eat, incorporating intact, unfired nematocysts from their prey into their own tissue where the cells remain functional and can discharge in defense of the nudibranch. The stolen defensive weaponry being maintained viable after transfer from one organism to another in a process whose cellular mechanics have been the subject of considerable ongoing research interest. Other nudibranch species sequester toxic compounds from sponges, bryozoans, and other prey items in their own tissues, becoming toxic through the accumulation of compounds they cannot themselves synthesize, a form of chemical defense by dietary acquisition that recurs across numerous unrelated nudibranch lineages as an independently evolved strategy. The ocean's oxygen production, generated primarily by marine phytoplankton through photosynthesis in the sunlit surface waters, accounts for approximately half of the total oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere, a contribution from organisms mostly invisible to the naked eye that underpins the breathability of the air across the entire planet. A dependency so fundamental and so thoroughly distributed across the entire ocean's surface that it is easy to overlook entirely when thinking about where oxygen comes from. Most people's intuitive answer being trees and forests on land, rather than microscopic algae and cyanobacteria floating in the upper few hundred feet of the world ocean. An assumption that is understandable but substantially incorrect. The phytoplankton that produce this oxygen are themselves the foundation of virtually all marine food webs, the primary producers that convert sunlight and dissolved carbon dioxide into organic matter. That organic matter then being consumed by zooplankton, which are consumed by small fish, which are consumed by larger fish, which are consumed by the largest predators. The entire edifice of marine life, from the smallest krill to the largest blue whale, resting ultimately on the photosynthetic activity of organisms that a single teaspoon of surface seawater can contain in billions of individual cells. And so we drift now, slowly upward through the water column, through the dark mesopelagic zone where the bioluminescent flashes come and go without anyone above watching, through the euphotic zone where the light from the surface has been filtering down all day, and finally to the surface itself, where the water meets the air and the wind moves things around without any particular interest in the ocean below. The whale is still down there somewhere, ticking at 15 heartbeats per minute in the deep dark, following whatever it follows at that depth. The Nautilus is drifting on its own slow current, adjusting the gas in its chambers by a fraction, finding the right depth. The hagfish is inside something in the sediment, absorbing nutrients through its skin, completely content. The sea star is very slowly pulling open a muscle, extruding its stomach through a gap measured in millimeters, waiting with the patience of something that has no concept of waiting. There is nothing more you need to carry from tonight. The ocean is still doing what it does, which is most of the things that keep the planet working quietly and without requiring any acknowledgement. The current is still moving somewhere beneath you, cold water sinking and warm water rising, the whole circulation taking 1,000 years to complete one circuit, which means the water that started moving when Genghis Khan was alive is still on its way around. Let that be someone else's concern for now. Let the reef accumulate its calcium carbonate in the dark. Let the whale fall sink slowly through the water column toward its decades of community. Let the seahorse couple do their morning greeting ritual in whatever warm, shallow water they have found. You have nothing to do about any of this tonight, and it will all still be there tomorrow, proceeding on its own terms at the pace of an ocean. Good night.